wrong way to start. But he didn't write that either, and the ballpoint pen wasn't invented in 1943. Now that we've got those myths out of the way, I'm going to tell you about a funny little story that happened tonight. Can somebody help me with this? Funny little story that happened tonight. Usually what happens when I come to any meeting, first thing I do is I put on a press tag, you know, one of these, and I walk around and I talk to all the media people to find out the latest of what's going on. Now, we learned this trick from a guy by the name of Michael Grant, who was a media relations person for Brian Mulroney. And he wrote a book entitled, What Are the Boys Saying? So I decided to go out and find out what are the boys saying. So as I stood at the back of the room and listened to some of the media mock us, one of them actually said to me, you know, I'm looking around and I almost want to rip this tag off because I see all the bozos that are wearing it. Well, I say to myself, who's the bozo here? I mean, really, the guy who stands there and tells me and mocks and degrades members in front of me, the guy who's probably too lazy to punch in a little bit of information on Infoglobe or Infomart or one of the press lines to find out who he's talking to, or us? I'll leave it at that. Then we had a group of professional victims that went crying to quasi-judicial thought police, like the Canadian Human Rights Commission, in order to tribunal into our hotline. Well, I can tell you, as of 7 o'clock tonight, the hotline was still on. So that tactic hasn't worked. Then we had special interest groups, along with the Canadian Human Rights Commission, decided to attempt to take us to federal court because they said the time had come to close down the hateful Heritage Front hotline once and for all. That was 6 months ago. The hotline's still on. You see, the Canadian Human Rights Commission and certain people said that Wolfgang was in civil contempt of an order by the Human Rights Commission and by the federal court with regard to the hotline. I don't think they've gotten a clear message yet. Yes, we do hold you in contempt, but we're not in civil contempt. So I'm sure next year when I stand here and I address you and give you an update on what's happening in the Heritage Front, I'm going to be able to report to you that if you call the infamous 693 number, it's still going to be operational and we're still going to be in business. And I think that, you know, it's a waste of taxpayers' money, and I think that they do no one a service at all by filling up the courts. And I think that they've shown that in our case. It's resolving nothing. The hotline's still on, and at points throughout the proceedings, I think it was fairly clear. The last one, I've got to tell you about this. We have a 22-year-old university student who represents the Heritage Front at the Canadian Human Rights hearings. This is beautiful. Here he is. One kid standing up there, an imposing courtroom. They fly in one of Pierre Trudeau's personal friends, a chap by the name of René Duval, a hired gun from Ottawa. Then they bring in another guy, a chap who's got a ponytail, big imposing guy, a lot of presence, and he's the assistant to help this lawyer. And they get up there and they're ready to give it to us. And they're getting all hyped up and prepared, and they're looking proper. And then people run up and give them messages, and they don't look so happy anymore. And then they start looking stressed out. Then he starts rubbing his head. And then he stands up and he announces, our witnesses are all in the hospital or sick today. Months they planned in advance to have 5 days to hear our case. And they have to stand up and say that Mr. Bobby Wash is in a hospital, but he can't tell anybody because he fears that something's going to happen to him. Then we've got somebody else who's in the hospital, at home sick in bed with pneumonia. But they just found out on Friday afternoon. Well, I can tell you, I'm not a doctor, but I've never seen it sneak up on somebody quite that quickly before. I think maybe there was another reason it didn't go. However, I guess we'll have to let our little 22-year-old student does the job again. He stood in front of them and he said to them, "This is completely outrageous. You're making a mockery out of the system." I think the commission must have agreed. The last time they kicked one of their own panel members off because the panel member was clearly showing bias. So I ask you, that's not a system I feel comfortable with, and I'm going to go back to the Attorney General of the province of Ontario. I don't really feel comfortable when 10 people can go there and demand that charges are laid. I don't think that's the job of protesters to make up the Attorney General's mind for him, and I think that brings the administration of justice into complete and total disrepute when that happens. As usual, we have for sale at the back of the room, we have magazines, we have pamphlets. There's someone here, I wanted to mention again about the Canadian Human Rights Commission, because this is a really unfortunate situation where these people can bring frivolous charges against us, because this is the tactic that they've used, and John will tell you this is the tactic that they've used for years, where they try to cause you to use up your resources. So they bring these frivolous charges against you to cause you to have to go out and defend yourself. And on the one, we've got our 22-year-old university student who's doing an excellent job, and I think that we should, because we're videotaping this now, I think we should show him how much we appreciate that. Is going to be passing around a box here, and anybody that can make any contributions to the legal fund would be greatly appreciated.
You're mispronouncing my name. Please pronounce it correctly.
I think in conclusion, I'd like to tell you about an incident that happened at CIUT Radio. And there was a young university girl who I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, was East Indian?
Yes.
Was East Indian. And she made a phone call to the hotline and said, "I'd like the Heritage Front to come out, and I'd like to interview the Heritage Front on the radio station." So she came out and did the interview with the guys from the Heritage Front at the radio station. Within 25 minutes, the protesters were down at the station, whining, crying, screaming, complaining, and because of her bringing the Heritage Front on her station, she is no longer allowed to work at that university radio station because she offended the moral decency of some Bolshevik stooge professor and his moronic followers. I find that unbelievable that they would let something like that go on, that they would govern people's thought even at a university. Another incident that took place was that Wolfgang and George were both invited to come down to the university and speak to a political science class, which they did, and the ARA went out and protested that as well. So I ask that each and every one of you, the next time we have a protest, to meet these haters head on, face to face, that you come out and join us. Thank you.
White power. White power. White power. White power. White power. White power. White power.